lovelies, so it finally arrived. I have a new laser cutter. I'm super excited. I ended up going with a Beamo instead of a Glowforge. I wanted a Glowforge for years, but recently I learned that the software requires the internet, and since we're moving towards bus life, that means that the Glowforge wouldn't work because most of the time we're probably not going to have a reliable internet connection. So something that just came out a couple of months ago is Beamo. The original version was around $800 with the pre-Kickstarter release, and now that it's actually on the market, it was almost $2,000. It was $1,899 or something like that. I was able to order from a US seller who included free shipping. Some of them don't, so definitely shop around if you're going to get one. This video is going to be just an unboxing and then also a review, initial review, and then a couple months from now, once I've used it quite a bit and I've learned from it and I've used different materials on it, I'll do a more extensive review, but this is just an initial first impression. So let's jump right in, unbox this thing because I'm so excited to unbox it. I can't even, I'm so excited. I was literally waiting by the door for FedEx today to drop it off, but so let's jump right in. So first off, the Beamo was more heavy than I expected. I know it's a big machine, but I just wasn't expecting it to be that heavy. Also, I had just had surgery, so I couldn't lift it on my own, so my husband had to move it around for me. The biggest problem I have with this order is that for such an expensive machine, it comes with absolutely no instructions in the box. I assume that's because they assume that if you're buying a laser cutter, you have some machining knowledge, but for someone like me who has absolutely no machining knowledge, it was a little overwhelming to have all these pieces and not understand what I'm supposed to be doing. So we plugged it in, we attached the very long tube in the back to the back, which I was really surprised at how long the tube actually was, so that was an added bonus. I was really excited for that. The first thing we noticed was that the machine actually came with a name. So my machine's name was Tucker. I learned later that each machine comes with a different name. I don't know how many name variations there are, but I thought that was a little cute addition, and it did kind of endear me to the machine a little bit. Once it was turned on, we were easily able to connect it to the Wi-Fi, and it automatically started downloading a firmware update as soon as it was connected to the Wi-Fi, and I did notice that some of the buttons on the touchscreen actually changed names. So that's something to be aware of. Since there were no other instructions, I figured we would need to download the software just as if it was any other machine. So I went to the Beamo website and found the Beamo Studio download link. Once we found that section, there is an instruction manual on the website. So we looked over the instructions. None of them mentioned the water tank. And it wasn't until we download the Beamo software and when you open the software for the first time, you get a second set of instructions. That set of instructions says that before you even turn the machine on, you should check the water tank. So we turned the machine off and we opened up the back. And for ours, it came full of water. I don't know if this is going to be the case for everyone, but ours was good to go. Something that was not in either of the instructions was that our laser was in the bottom corner. And to fix that, all you have to go to do is hit the maintain button and then hit home. This is all on the touchpad, and then it moves the laser to the 0 point at the top left corner. I found the instructions on the website to be a little vague, but essentially you just have to move the little plastic tab that's to the right of the laser down, and it must be barely touching the object for your focus depth. And you adjust the height of the laser by turning the gold dial at the top. Our laser came all the way down, so we had to raise it up to be able to even fit the material underneath the laser in between the grid. Another thing to note is the honeycomb metal piece does move around, and it does take some adjusting to get it so that it fits perfectly on the screen. And since then, I've even moved it around depending on what type of cut I'm doing. I feel like it doesn't fit correctly as compared to other laser cutters that I've seen that have like a permanent grid. But the cool thing is the honeycomb grid is easily removable. It obviously is good for cutting to keep it in there, but when you have little pieces that fall through to the bottom, you can easily take the honeycomb out and clean underneath it. I found the Beamo Studio to be pretty intuitive from this point out. For someone who's familiar with a lot of softwares, I already use Adobe softwares, so I felt like things were pretty easy to figure out. I expected when you clicked the little picture to, the little camera, I mean, to automatically for it to scan the whole thing, but you actually have to click and drag the area that you want. So that was one thing that took me, 10 seconds to kind of figure out. For my first cut, I cut a jewelry design that I already knew worked since I've been ordering my own jewelry to be cut out from other companies. So I'm familiar with designing in Illustrator files. The default settings worked fine for cutting and engraving for this first cut. Hey guys, so it's been about a month since I got my Beamo, and I've had more time to kind of test it out properly, and there's a couple of things that I've run into that maybe could potentially be something that you'll run into as well, depending on what you're using your machine for. As you can see, I moved my Beamo into a different room. This is my office, and it has a window just up over there, and the tube is long enough that I just throw the tube outside the window. It is worth mentioning that you are going to need some sort of board or block edge, because right now I'm just throwing the tube out the window, and it does blow back quite a bit into the room, but this is just a temporary situation until we get the section of the bus built, and then it's going to be going into the bus build, and then it'll have exhaust fans straight to the outside. So for a temporary situation, it does work for me right now, but in the long run, it's going to be effective for you to have a window with some sort of cut so that the tube can go through and it blocks the air from coming back in, because it does smell horrible. And I've only been cutting wood, not plastic. So here's a couple of other things that I noticed. While the first design did turn out really nicely, and subsequently some other designs that I did that were rather large also turned out very nicely with the default settings. But as I started to get smaller and more detailed, when I moved into some of my smaller jewelry pieces, I had a lot of issues. If you're unfamiliar with laser cutters like I was, it was a lot of researching that I had to do on the difference between power and speed and what you need to do with your machine. And there's a lot of people that understand the whole process a lot better than I could ever describe it to you. But essentially, if you're using a fast speed, you need a higher power. And if you're using a slower speed, you need a lower power. What this also means when it comes to doing details, where accuracy is very important, you have to lower your speed. And that means you also have to then lower your power, otherwise you could catch your materials on fire. So this was all something that I had to learn through trial and error. Other people suggest doing a test sheet where you just do a bunch of squares. But that actually didn't work for the level of detail that I needed, because the squares are just a box, and so the laser, it cuts it very easily, right? So I actually ended up having to do a series of small pieces of my little kitty design that I have, my sleeping cat design. So I did a whole bunch of those in a bunch of different speeds and powers to kind of test out what worked best for my small, intricate jewelry. So that's something to keep in mind. If you're going to be doing smaller, more detailed work, you do need to go slower. The belt is also a part of this, not just because of the speed of the laser and the power of the laser, but it's really about the belt that the laser is attached to, because if it's going too fast, it's too shaky, and then the whole line is shaky. And I'll show you some of my pieces that are totally ruined and destroyed. They're not usable, and you'll see that the lines are extremely shaky when they're supposed to be curved. So here's a few pieces that show what I'm talking about. This is an example of where the lines are super shaky. If you can see that. They're not smooth. And also these engraving lines don't match up with the cuts at all. These swoop lines are supposed to match up with this top cut, because it's basically supposed to be a wave. Another mistake that I've made, that I just thought I'd put it out there because it is something that I've made a couple of times, even though I now know that I can't do that. It's just a very easy mistake to make, at least for me. I have previously had experience designing in Illustrator. I designed my jewelry in Illustrator, and then I would send my SVG files out to a laser cutter out of California who would cut them for me. Their file format that they asked for was that cut lines would be blue, engraved lines would be red, and then solid engraved shapes would be a black fill. So that is what I use for my files, and that still works for Beamo because you can assign the colors to specific tasks. One thing to pay attention to though is that even though my layers in Illustrator the black fills were on top, the red engraving was underneath that, and then the cutting was the final task. When it got imported into Beamo, for some reason, sometimes the layers get rearranged, or sometimes if my red isn't specifically that color red, I have like 2 colors of red, sometimes the layers get duplicated and it can cause issues. Obviously, if you cut a small piece out of the bigger piece and it falls through, then if it's engraving after that, it's not going to engrave accurately on the right spot. So you have to make sure that you're fill engraving first, then line engraving, and then the final cut lines. So that's easily done. There's just little arrows in the Beamo Studio. It's a very simple fix. It's just something that I have neglected to look until it was cutting, and then I had to start all over again, and I ruined a piece of my material. So it's kind of aggravating when you make the mistake. This is another example of where I had 2 different engraved reds, and so it did this one first and then it did this one, and obviously the mask on the raccoon doesn't line up at all. Also, you can still see it wasn't slow enough, so there is a little bit of shakiness in some of those lines. The cut was done first, and then the engraving and also the cuts were shifted. It was like 2 different colored blues, so it cut the hole first and then it cut the shape, so they're supposed to be hanging earrings with a gap there. That didn't happen. So that's another example. And you can see this is supposed to be a smooth circle. You can see it looks awful. It's very shaky and awful. One thing I did want to mention is my husband did test out the app, the mobile app where you can take a picture and send it to the machine. It did seem to work very fine, but we've only done it a couple of times. I haven't extensively tested it, so I don't feel comfortable saying it works 100% of the time or it works amazing. I would say it is effective, it does work, but I would have to do more testing to really stand by that aspect of it. But most of my designs are already on the computer. I'm very comfortable with Illustrator, and so that's what I've decided to use for my cutting. Overall, I'm really happy with my Beamo. It's the perfect size for me, especially since I'm doing small jewelry, but then also I can do bigger pieces. I just have to think about the layers more carefully. So I've done this piece that I'm showing you right now, which was done all with relatively small pieces, all put together, and overall it's over a foot tall in length with all the assembled pieces. So there's plenty of things that you can do with this machine, even with the small size. And for me, it's going to be absolutely perfect for our tiny home and our bus life. It just is the absolute perfect size I could ask for in a laser cutter, and it works perfectly for what I need with wood. I haven't tested out acrylics yet, and I will come back probably in 6 months or maybe in a year and review how it's going. By then, hopefully I'll have tested a lot more materials. I hope to get some acrylics soon to test that out. But since a majority of my products that I sell are wood, that is what I've been using, and I'm really happy with it so far. I'd also like to mention there's quite a few Facebook groups, but one of them in particular, I'll link in the description box below, has been really helpful for answering questions and also looking at what other people have asked before and getting help when you need it. If you are getting a Beamo, good luck to you, and please feel free to share with me any projects that you work on in the future. You can connect with me on Instagram, on my art Instagram. I love to see what other people are doing with their laser cutters. I'm fascinated by laser cut art, and I feel like it's really unexplored territory for a lot of artists. So I'm excited to meet and connect with other laser cut artists. So if you are that person, please do connect with me. I'd love to see what you're working on. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you found this video helpful. Do consider subscribing. I make new art videos every single week. If you're interested in my bus life videos, I'll also link my second channel, which is all about bus life and minimalism. Thanks so much for watching, and until next time, remember to create, love, and travel on. Bye!